Okay. I first find Lorraine in her videos when I look for the use of property making herbs, what is called in Chinese Pao Ji. And I think what Lorraine gives to our therapists, most in the West, that do not know to read Chinese or not grew up with the Chinese culture, is a very great and very important things that we are missing. And also in a Trifolium pharmacy, we are just a pharmacy for herbals. We don't have medicines. And we believe in the ancient way to making medicine, to give the medicine, to give the herbs. So we would like to bring you, the community of Trifolium, the knowledge and everything that you can do to learn about what the old doctors of the Chinese medicine did and do. And we invite you to look for our in Facebook or in YouTube about more lectures and more information about making herbs, making preparations herbs. And in our pharmacy, we have also like 15 kind of processing herbs and making all kind of decoction. So it's not a lot, but we will be bringing more for the community. And thank you very much. If everybody can make themselves mute, and if you have questions, so please write it on the chat in English. And in the end of the lecture, we will ask Lorraine, and she will be glad to answer. And so good luck and enjoy.
My turn?
It's your turn.
Okay, hi, thank you, Adiel, so much for asking me, and thank you everyone for being here. Good evening. For me, it's good morning. Need a little bit more caffeine, but hopefully I'll be okay. In case you don't know me, which many of you may not, one of the things I really wanted to is find out how ancient people did our medicine and try to understand that and be able to replicate it. And I don't always think we have to do things the same, but at least that's what I want to understand. So quite a few years ago, I did this for Moxa. I translated a whole bunch of stuff from ancient books about Moxabustian. And then later, I've been doing it about making different herbal preparations. And then during the pandemic, when we were isolating at home, I started making videos of how to make different things. And so, yeah, you can find me on YouTube just by searching for my name. And I've got videos on how to make honey pills and how to grind herbs and how to do this and how to do that. So the videos are not very well produced, but at least they really go step by step. So you should be able to try things based on that. In any case, today, this is, I think, the first time I've shared this whole bit. It's 2 chapters from a book called Pauger Dafa. Pauger, as Adiel said, is the processing of herbs like honey frying or vinegar frying, that kind of stuff. And this is a book where this guy, Dr. Miao in the Ming Dynasty, 1622, he described the Pauger. And then he had some chapters at the end, which he described some things of, like how to, in detail, how to do a decoction, which, most books assume that you know how to cook. And actually, I don't know how to cook. I don't cook. So I'm really grateful when, an ancient author really describes the process and doesn't just assume that everyone knows how to do it. And so the question I ask at the beginning of this is that if you could make your medicine more effective, even it takes a little more time, but then I personally believe it's going to be more effective. Wouldn't you at least consider doing it? And so there are three things which are at least somewhat addressed today. One is the method of administration. Are you going to make it as a decoction, a pill, a powder, and so forth? I know everybody wants to use granules for their convenience, and actually granules are better than not taking herbs. If your patients won't take a decoction or, you know, do something more complex, then granules are fabulous. They are convenient. But I do personally believe that if you make the formula the way it was intended to be made, that adds to the efficacy. And I'll tell you why as we go through this. The time of administration is like mentioned at the end, and, you know, it's a smaller thing. And then, of course, herbal processing. So these are some of the things we're going to cover today, because this Miao Xiyong, this doctor of the Ming Dynasty, discussed it, and I translated it. I don't think his bio is all that important because we don't have a lot of time. So you can kind of read the bio on your own. So yeah, you can read that information if you want. But let's jump right into, you know, his chapter. So the beginning of the book, it's like, you know, how are the different ways Gansao is processed? How are the different ways Renshen is processed? How are the different ways Dangui is processed? Going, you know, herb by herb, and with some additional information about each herb. But then at the end, he has like quite a few pages of, you know, talking about different things that relate to herbs. And so here's this guide to using herbal medicine. And so he says that every type of herbal preparation that you're going to give your patients has appropriate preparation methods, and you shouldn't change it, he's saying. Now, we should know he was like a Shanghanlun guy. He was like a Jingfang, a classical medicine practitioner. So he probably wasn't into innovation in other ways as well. But I think we should at least consider his arguments. So he's saying you should make it the way the original author told you to make it. Sometimes translation has certain issues. So he says, this word gao, oh, I need my little pen so I can make a mess here. Okay, here's my pen. This word gao, there's no equivalent word in English. It can mean ointment or plaster or paste or syrup. And so he means the whole thing. He doesn't mean one of these particular types, but gao just means a really thick, you know, for preparation, like a syrup is thicker than a decoction, or an ointment is thick. So he says some herbs should be made into pills or powders or decocted or even made into like a wine. Some should be made into a syrup or you know, ointment or whatever. And, you know, he says, you know, you can use certain herbs together and then other things you shouldn't use together. Some things, you know, can be put in alcohol and some things can't be put in alcohol. You cannot go beyond the nature of the herbs. So again, this word jiu, which is here translated alcohol, I don't have a satisfying way of translating this, because jiu can mean you know, a wine, it can mean a distilled liquor, it can mean, you know, a liniment that's applied externally, it can mean something that you drink and take internally. And so I've translated it differently depending on the context. But again, here he's kind of using it generically. So I have, you know, alcohol, short for alcohol-based liquid. And then this is the part that just totally like astonished me and made me think differently about why If it's a Tang formula, why do you need to decoct it? If it's a San formula, why was it originally a powder, and so forth? This part was so wonderful for my insight and understanding. He says, decoction means to wash away. Before I talk about what does he mean, note that decoction is this word tang and wash away is this word dang. So they rhyme, they sound very, very similar. In addition, if you look at the character itself, you can see it's the same character, but the second, version of it has the grass radical over it. So it's visually a pun, and it rhymes, and it sounds almost the same. This is an ancient style of writing that's considered very literate people use this, defining one word by another word that sounds the same or almost the same. And so this word, wash away, decoction means to wash away. Of course, decoction is a liquid, but this word dang has so many other meanings. So it can wash away because, you're using this liquid to wash away the disease, but it can also mean to dislodge, to sweep away, to drain off, to clear away, to eliminate, and so forth. And actually, this passage comes from an earlier book, but this is the first time I saw this passage was when I was translating this. It's also in Li Shizhen's Ban Sao Gang Mo. So he says, this means boiling herbs in a clear liquid. That's what a decoction is. And he says, use it to remove serious disease because you can wash away this serious disease. But it doesn't actually say excess or deficiency, although washing away, you would assume that's a little bit more on the excess side, because you don't want to wash away deficiency, you want to fill it up. He says powder means to scatter. And here's a case where the same Chinese character, the exact same character, has two different meanings, but it uses a slightly different pronunciation. The tone is different between the two. So powder means to scatter. In other words, that's definitely used for excesses and accumulations. Powders don't supplement, they scatter what's accumulated. And so, this means grinding herbs into a fine powder. Use it to remove acute diseases. So think about powder. Put some powder in the palm of your hand and blow it, and it just scatters. That's the image for powder formulas. I'm not talking about granules. I'm talking about ground up herbs into a powder. And later he'll talk about how do you make powdered formulations for people to drink or whatever. But if you go in your mind through all the different San formulas, they're all at least partially dispersing. Xiaoyao San disperses an accumulation of liver constraint. Renchen Badu San gets rid of evils, even though it's supplementing at the same time. And if you go through all the San formulas, you're going to find the vast majority are to scatter accumulations and evils. The exceptions are things like Shangmai San, which is there because of emergency. One of the other benefits of powders is that you can have it ready for an emergency, and it just takes 5 minutes to prepare so that the patient can use it, whereas a decoction takes a lot longer to prepare. So there are a few exceptions for San formulas, but those are going to be the ones that are available in case of an emergency. So then here is, this word gao again, which could mean a syrup, a paste, an ointment, but he says gao means owl. So it rhymes again. And basically, you're going to simmer for a very, very, very long time to make a thick paste. This one doesn't have the pun like the others do, but there are some herbs that are taken like their juice that's not necessarily cooked. And so, for example, maybe you know that the Nobel Prize for Medicine was given to Tu Youyou, this Chinese doctor who, developed the current Western medication for malaria and, artemisinin. And the thing that gave her the clue to being able to properly extract the artemisinin was she realized that she couldn't cook the Qinghao. She had to soak it in water and then wring it out. Not that that's the modern manufacturing process, but that's the instructions from Zhouhou Beiji Feng, this ancient book. And that will get out the juice, but uncooked. So, liquid means to pound fresh herbs. You pound them to kind of break down the cell walls and then wring them out to get a little bit of juice. This was used in ancient times, probably not so much today. Pills mean slow. So this wan is, Lu Wei Di Huan Wan, pills mean Huan. Huan is like slow and gentle. It kind of has a range of meanings: moderate, slow, gentle, relaxed. And so pills are made into round pellets. They aren't quick, but they're gentle and slow. So this is why he's saying you have to pay attention to the manufacturing process, because different processes contribute different qi to the formula. And if you make a pill into a decoction, it's not going to be quite as gentle and slow. And if you make a decoction into a pill, it's not going to, wash away in the same way, and totally powders to scatter. So I really have come to the conclusion, I think it makes a difference, but you have to play with this and decide what you think. Also, you have to decide what's practical. As I said before, if the patient's not going to take it, then it doesn't do any good to insist that it's done a certain way. So better to get them to take the herbs at all. So I already talked about this slide. This is from some other books, because I want to pursue this idea that the format of a formula, of a prescription, makes a difference. So this is from another book, an earlier book, and this, it doesn't actually say who wrote this. I forgot who wrote this, but it's a book that summarizes two earlier doctors, a Dr. Su and a Dr. Shen. Anyway, so decoctions, powders, and pills each have times when they should be used. The main principles is, if you want to reach the 5 zang, the 5 yin organs, and the 4 limbs, decoctions are going to do it. But if you want to go to the stomach or the diaphragm region, this book says powders are better. He also says that decoctions aren't good for herbs that have toxicity. If they have mild toxins, like maybe bancha or something like that, those work better as powders. And if they have major toxins, they're going to be used as pills. Today, I don't think we're going to use herbs with major toxins, but that means they're going to be digested lower in the digestive tract, so maybe the toxicity will be reduced. But here, this sentence is kind of important. Use decoctions if you want to be quick. Powders are a little slower, but pills are very slow, he says. This also contributes to the image I'm trying to build about the format of herbs. Wu Zhitong wrote Wenbing Qiaobian, really the most famous book on Wenbing theory, warm disease theory. And he's not actually talking about pills versus powders and so forth, but I think this is still relevant. He says light, clear herbs are chosen for the lungs, but if you boil them too much, the flavor becomes thick, which kind of means concentrated and heavy. And so since they're no longer light, they're going to go a little deeper in the body and go into the middle jiao. He says the lungs are in the highest position, so if herbs are too heavy, they go past the location. So now we have an idea that both in terms of like thickness of its qi, as well as in terms of the format of the herbal formula, that the heavier it is, the more it's going to go to the lower jiao. The lighter it is, the more it's going to go to the upper jiao. And that helps explain some things too. Like, you know, powders might be closer to the upper jiao because they're really light, but big fat honey pills like Luwei Dihuangwan or, you know, Shenqiwan is going to go to the lower jiao because they're big old pills. They're going to fall down to a lower position. With this kind of information, suddenly I feel like you know, before when I was a student, it's like, gee, why did they make this a powder? Why did they make that a pill? And nobody ever talked about why, but now I kind of understand why. And now if I'm reading a formula, seeing how the original author intended it to be made is giving a clue to the intent of that author. So, and then he starts talking about rice wine. It seems like he's kind of throwing this in the middle. It seems like out of sequence, but you know, I'm going in order. So he says, if you steep herbs in rice wine, then why would you do that? Because if an herb is cold and yin, then you might want to do that. I don't know why he has dangui here, but he does. But things like, you know, shu di huang and to make it into shang di huang to make it into shu di huang or huang bai or junro, then the wine, you know, the rice wine makes it a little less cold and a little better for spleen and stomach. And in addition, it helps move qi and blood rather than stagnate things. He says you can also cut herbs into small pieces and put them in rice wine. You can even simmer it for a while, although I tend to use a longer steeping rather than simmering it. So you put these herbs in rice wine and age it for a while. And then he's talking here not about a liniment that you apply, but about like every morning and every evening having a small amount of it is another way of taking, you know, herbs with rice wine. You know, some medicinal wines, some of them are supplementing depending on the herbs and some of them are attacking, but they're effective. And you can also decoct, some formulas might call for you to decoct it in water, but add a little bit of rice wine at the end. And he says, add it, you know, near the end. Okay, back to the powder thing. Powders, he says, don't follow the channels in the blow vessels. I guess they scatter too much, like wei qi moves out, powders move out. And so he does say, though, that they can work on the stomach and the organs, and especially for the lung, because they're light, so they're going to treat the upper body easily. And then there's this thing about how you take powders. So first you grind them, and some formulas will tell you to make a fine powder. In other words, you have to sift it, and any coarse parts you regrind, and you know, until it's all very, very fine, like wheat flour or something like that. And then other formulas you grind, but you can let it be a coarse powder. And he says that when it's heavy flavors and thick and rich, that you're going to pour boiling water on it. And actually, he doesn't say it here, but you can strain it or you can let it settle out and just drink the liquidy part. But if it's a formula that has very light flavors, mild flavors, then you're going to boil it for a period of time and even drink the dregs. But when you do that, you need a very finely ground powder. I've done this, you know, just to experiment and see. And yeah, it tastes a little chalky in your mouth, but it's not horrible. Basically, you know, I'm not a perfectionist about this stuff, so mostly I'm going to let it settle to the bottom and just drink the liquid. But you know, you can take the dregs if it's thin and mild, and if it's finely ground. Questions? Okay. As far as pills go, I've been playing with making pills for, I don't know, 5 years, 8 years. I don't know how long I've been, longer than that. I just remembered, but my first times making pills were disasters. And so little by little, I found clues and I figured out how to do it better. I wish I had seen, what he has to say at the beginning. To remove disease of the lower body, the pills should be very large so that they're heavy, so they fall to the bottom. The middle jaw will be, medium-sized pills, and the upper jaw have to be really teeny tiny little pills. Like you might take a lot of them, but if you want to reach the upper jaw, they have to be small so they float more. And then he talks about making, sometimes pills are made with flour and water. I mean, it could be rice flour, it could be wheat flour, whatever, flour and water, and they dissolve or digest more slowly so they can go farther down. Making them with rice wine or vinegar can help contract if it's a formula to astringe. Use ginger juice if you're making pills with excuse me, bansha or tiananqing, because they have some amount of toxicity and the ginger juice helps to relieve that. And in ancient recipe books, some of them are made with steamed cakes, but I don't see that in most formulas that we keep using. So in the interest of time, you can read about steamed cakes on your own. But I tried to summarize some of the things I've been saying so far, and a few of these come from stuff we haven't yet mentioned. But if you want to reach the upper jaw, like the lungs, then you should use powders or very small pills because they float. If you want to reach the middle jaw, then water pills tend to be really small. They're made with a liquid like water or vinegar or something like that that's thin. Honey pills are much bigger and they're heavier and they're chewable. So water pills have to be relatively small because they're crunchy that you can't chew them, and so they have to be small enough to swallow. But honey pills get chewed, and so they can be larger, and plus the honey makes them heavier. They go to the lower jaw. We also saw some statements that decoctions go to the limbs and the yin organs, powders go to the diaphragm and stomach, and honey pills, this statement is coming. We haven't seen it yet, but they go to the channels and the woe vessels, surprisingly, but maybe the sweet flavor helps send it everywhere, just like gansao helps send it everywhere. So honey pills dissolve more slowly, and here's where he says their qi follows the channels, the jingwo. Wax pills, nobody uses that. And since I have too many slides, I'm going to just, jump over certain things. Don't mix honey and sugar, he says. Okay, I won't. I promise. You can seal pills in wax, but don't mix honey and wax either. Then there's this thing about condensing honey or processing honey. I don't know, here in the US, there's a lot of pushback by people against cooking honey because, honey has enzymes. And while that's true, ancient people didn't use honey because of their enzymes. They used honey because it's moistening and supplementing, and it's also a good binder. And if, ancient people made medicine using condensed honey, then I at least want to experiment with it. But I will confess that when making honey pills, I don't always condense the honey first. The idea is that honey has a certain moisture content, which can vary from different, batches of honey. And if there's too much moisture content, then the pills tend to get sticky and slimy, and also may go bad sooner. honey itself is antimicrobial, but nevertheless, if there's too much liquid in it, it may not preserve the pills quite as long. What ancient people did was that they simmered the honey to get a lower water content in it. And I have videos on YouTube about like that, how to simmer, how to process honey. So if you want to see, you can see that. So here he's giving some technical details about it, which I don't follow. Modern people don't necessarily follow this. So for some reason, he's adding water to the honey and then cooking it down. But I don't know, why do we want to add water to begin with? So you have to simmer at very low heat, otherwise it'll just burn. But here's a couple slides about, honey. And so, if you condense it first, then the pills won't get so sticky. So he has some different stuff there that you can read. And he's telling you that actually you should condense it and make the pills right away. You shouldn't condense it in advance, because when you've simmered it down and then it's hot, it's still very watery and liquidy, so it will mix nicely. But if it cools down, it becomes so thick and sticky that you can't even blend the herbs inside. The problem is, though, that if the honey is like really hot, you could burn yourself. So you have to be careful. And a thing that it took me a long time to find, but when I found it, it made all the difference in the world in making honey pills, is that you can't just mix the dough, until it seems kind of mixed and then make the pills, because they're always way too sticky, no matter how much you think you've mixed the dough. But I first found this in a book about making moist incense. And what you need to do is pestle the dough in a mortar and pestle. And this says 1,000 times, which is a lot, but other books might say 100 times. And so you make the dough and you want to make it so it's kind of dry looking, and you think this is too dry, but you can always add more honey if it is too dry. And then you put it in the mortar and pestle, and then you pestle it 100 times. And I literally count 100 times, or you could knead it on the table if you want to. But when you pestle it 100 times, then it makes the perfect dough. So yeah, sometimes you might have to add a little more powder or a little more honey, but you can make honey pills that are not sticky at all if you use very little honey and you pestle it and pestle it and pestle it. It will become really smooth and nice and make good honey pills. I have videos about that. So when you're making pills, you want the herbs very dry. You don't want moisture content, because pills stick around. You keep them for a while, taking them one by one, and if the herbs are moist, then they might get moldy over time, even though they're mixed with honey. Interesting, like a problem that I've had making honey pills is, for example, if you're trying to make, shen qi wan or li wei di huang wan, it's really hard you can't grind sheng di or shu di, because it's just sticky and it just makes a mess and it doesn't grind. And it's the same with other moist herbs like that. So he's telling you the trick, which is true, this will work. Dry it in the sun. Well, I don't have a good place to do that. Or like use gentle fire and put it on a tile or on a baking stone or something like that, and bake it until it's dry. If you're using it in a decoction, you don't want to dry it out. But if you want to grind it into powder, you can bake it, or even you could like stir fry it for a while to dry it out. And then after it's cooled off, then you can powder it along with the rest of the herbs. And actually, what I tend to do with my herb grinder is grind all the other herbs, not the moist one. And then when they're ground, then I put small pieces of the dihuang in and grind again. And then it just gets ground and gets absorbed. But it's also telling you to, like, when they're moist, get out more than you need and don't weigh them for the formula until after they're dry, which makes sense because, you know, you don't really want the moisture weight, you want the weight of the herbs. This is different though for decoctions and wines, you don't have to do that, but for pills, that's a trick that will help a lot for all of those pills that have dihuang in it. So he's talking about sifting, yeah. So if you're gonna, yes.
What about pills that are not from honey? It's the same process?
Like water pills?
Yes.
Like Baohe one is not a honey pill. You know, when you have indigestion, you don't want the thick and heaviness of honey. So Baohe one was originally a water pill. You know, what surprised me is that when I started looking into this, like I always thought there were all kinds of water pills, like so many formulas must have been water pills. You can't tell from the name Wan if it's a water pill or a honey pill, but actually very few pills are water pills. But I thought that because everybody takes the little tea pills, you know, that you can buy in bottles. And so I thought water pills were more common. But if you're trying to grind a powder, whether it's for honey pills or water pills, if it's a moist herb, you know, it's not going to grind. And actually, Jergan Sao doesn't grind very easily because it's a little sticky on the outside. And so you could further stir fry it until it's drier. But like also one of the things I do is grind the other herbs first and then put in small pieces of the one that's sticky. So I would say, yeah, if you had a sticky herb in a water pill formula, I'd still try to dry it out before grinding it. Yeah. Is that your question?
Yes, and also the process of making a dough and everything is the same with honey and the water?
The water pills are not going to be sticky. I mean, they have to dry out. You have to put them on a screen and dry them out, or in a food dehydrator, or I don't know what equipment you have in your pharmacy. So, but the water pills, when they dry out, they're going to be not sticky, and you can just put them in a bottle and they last forever. But the honey pills, you know, you really have to worry about the stickiness, because if you put them together in like a jar and then they just become one mass and they're all stuck to each other, they're not much good. There are a couple ways people deal with that. One is they put a small amount of sesame oil in a bowl and then they roll it, you know, when it's done in the sesame oil, and then they won't stick together. But then, you know, then you've got some sesame oil. And of course you don't want too much either, because that would be gross. You can buy these little plastic eggs that you can put each pill in one by one, but that, you know, I mean, that takes, then each pill you have to deal with one by one and put in an egg, and it, you know, you have to buy those things and they're hard to find, but on AliExpress, you can find them. You could also wrap them. You can get like rice paper that's edible and wrap each one like candies. You know how some candies are wrapped like that? All of that's a pain. What I do for myself is I just really try to make them not sticky. So that's the difference, is you have to worry about the stickiness with honey pills and make them bigger, and with water pills you make them smaller. But even if you add too much water, when you dehydrate them, when you dry them, they'll be fine.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I will say, I don't have a practice now and haven't in a while. So making stuff for myself, I understand I'm willing to take on the burden for like experimenting or for taking my own pills. But if I had a busy clinic, then I might not be able to do this for all the patients. But I guess that's what a pharmacy is for, a service that the pharmacy can offer. And if you get so many offers, you just hire more people. Yay. Some stuff about making liquor. Time is really passing, so I'm going to jump over some of this because, of course, you can read it and I don't have comments about everything. If you want to make, like I've made a lot of ointments and plasters and stuff like that. Here, I don't think it's talking about a syrup, but one of the tricks that's just really quite wonderful is how long do you simmer it in the oil? Like, let's say I'm making it with sesame oil and then I'm going to add beeswax later to make an ointment. And so the thing is, if you can find an herb in the formula that you're simmering that's white-ish, and like Baijiu is in a lot of these kind of formulas that are in ointments. So Baijiu is this white herb. When it turns the color French fries, it's done. Just think like I'm cooking French fries when it looks like a proper French fry. But if it's a dark herb, you can't tell the color change. So you don't want it to burn. You don't want it to blacken. But that's a good gauge, is like, some light colored herb. Dangui is light enough, that you can, when dangui looks like French fries color, then it's done. And actually, when I do this in a class and we have a formula that has dangui in it, and then I strain it out, people, you can eat it and it's not horrible to like French fried dangui. It's not horrible. So it's kind of fun. Okay, so here's this other thing that for a lot of gao kind of recipes like syrups and ointments, excuse me, they tell you to heat it up and then let it cool down, and then heat it up again and let it cool down, and heat it up again and let it cool down. I don't always do this, but this is something that they recommend. So, you just have to decide how fussy you are about this, or try things once and see if you think it makes a difference. I don't do everything that's here. Use new cloth when you bring out the gao so that it's not kind of tainted with something else. I don't think that most of us are using a lot of minerals, but it's talking about wrapping it in silk. And, in ancient times, they did make gao with sesame oil and beeswax, but they also made gao with various kinds of fats, but like, no, thank you. And also it's talking about shanghuang and jusha, which are ones that have toxicity. We're not going to do that. Okay, here's an interesting thing. That you've seen recipes, I think, for herbs that are supposed to be charred, or, blackened, or, like, especially to stop bleeding, that they often tell you to like char this herb. So there's a sentence that I came across in formulas all the time that says, char it without damaging its nature. It's like, what does that mean? And I ended up like reading a lot about how do you make charcoal. And so apparently charcoal is made by, you take wood or whatever, plant matter, and you put it in a sealed container and you heat it up. So it's not actually burning, there's no fire, but you heat it up, and all the volatile oils and all kinds of stuff evaporates off and is burnt off. But when you remove the lid eventually, when it's done, it still has exactly the same shape. It's still in the shape of a piece of wood, or it's still in the shape of the herb. If you burn things with oxygen, it just becomes ash and falls apart. So that's not preserving its nature. Ash is ash, and it's not gonna help your formula. But if you use, I think I had a formula with Tian Nanxing that it was for an ointment, and it wanted you to do this. And yeah, I could get it so virtually all of it was black, but it was still in pieces exactly the same, and it didn't crumble. You know, you could break the pieces, of course, but so that's what you want to do. It's kind of a pain, and you want to do it outside because some smoke will be emitted. But you know, you get a wok or whatever, and you put it in, spread out as much as you can, and you put the lid on the wok. And then in the old books, it's telling me my internet is unstable, so I hope I'm not freezing. Okay, it's gone. So in the old books, that have you make, like out of clay, a little strip that you could seal the wok, and just leave a tiny opening so that some fumes can come out, and you just cook it and cook it and cook it until the smoke stops coming out. And then you can let it cool and remove the lid. So if you ever have to do that, there's, you know, a little bit of information here about that. So if you have to add tauren, you know, which is like a kind of oily seed into a, you know, formula, and you're trying to grind it, then it wants you to pound it separately into a paste, and then you can mix it with the other already powdered herbs and mix it together, and the other powdered herbs will absorb some of the oils. So that's that first one. That's about like doing other types of formulations besides decoctions. Do you have any questions or things you want to talk about before I briefly talk about this second chapter? I know we're getting short on time. Okay, we'll have more time for questions at the end. This second chapter is shorter, and it's rules for decocting herbs from the same book. And he has something that I haven't seen in a lot of places, and I am not sure if we need to do that. But what he wants you to do is take the chief herb or the sovereign herb of the formula and boil it first, and then add the rest of the herbs. Sometimes maybe that's good, but I'm not sure that's necessary. Anyway, he wants you to use a low fire and simmer it. He wants you to keep the pot covered at all times and not be opening it and checking it. And he says that if you, you know, like pour it right away, or if you open to check, you're letting the chi leak out, and you know, so it'll be in the air and not in the formula. Intense fire is inappropriate. If you're boiling it too strongly, then the herbal chi won't be extracted, and it will be impure. And then he says too many people boil it at too high a boil, and then they say the herbs aren't worked. He says, who should be blamed? It's like your fault, you cooked it wrong. That's what he's saying. So here he goes through, we have a number of slides where he's listing, like if you want to promote sweating, boil mahuang first. Well, actually you should, because it has some foam and stuff like that. But you know, for harmonizing herbs, boil chai hu first. That's that thing in the beginning of this chapter that he says boil the chief herb first. So he's just listing chief herbs and going through them one by one. And he says it'll be more effective if you do that. But if you, are you able to use mahuang there? Mahuang is difficult to get here.
No, it's illegal in Israel.
Yeah, so grow your own. Okay, sorry, did I say that? Yeah, it's actually here, it's illegal in pre-made formulations, but actually if you can get your hands on it, you can use it in a decoction or homemade stuff. But you just really have to be careful, here. So anyway, it makes foam, and you want to sweep off the foam. If you don't sweep off the foam, the people become irritated and fidgety. And so after you've swept off the foam, they want you to add enough water to top it back off to the level it should have been. Dahuang, there's some information about how to treat dahuang. Yeah. All of these, like, sticky, heavy things like ujao, which I'm not going to use. But it wants you to decoct the other herbs and strain them out, and then into the clean, strained hot liquid, you can mix these other things. And whole things like datzao or any kind of whole seeds wants you to chop them or break them open. I think most of us probably knew that. Remove the skin of taoren and xingren. I don't know if they do that when you buy it from the pharmacy. Some of the directions seem to be made for, like, the herbs are not prepared as much as our herbs are today. Also, these big seeds like sharen, it wants you to smash them, but add them near the end because, you know, they're so aromatic that all the qi will be in the air. Shijiao we don't use anymore. But if you're using some other kind of horn, then this tells you how, but don't use shijiao even if you could get it. Here's an interesting thing. Sometimes some highly aromatic herbs are powdered, like, you know, mushang, rushang moyao. Chenchang is like expensive and a little hard to get, but it wants them ground first, and then you've made the decoction, and then you pour a little of the decoction into a cup and mix in the powder, drink the powder, and then drink the rest of the decoction. You boil formulas down. They didn't have, you know, clocks like we do. So how long do you cook a formula for? It would say cook it until it's 70% of its original amount. Here, what they tell you is 40%, which seems wrong, but, you know, it seems too much. But that's how they knew in the old days, is to how much to boil down is like, if you had this much to begin with, then boil it until you have that much liquid left. Of course, how are you going to do that without opening the lid to see how much liquid is left? They didn't have glass pots. And he told us not to open the lid. Herbs to move things should be not cooked for too long. So you can start with less water, but don't cook it for a long time. But herbs to supplement need to be cooked for a long time. So start with a lot of water, but you cook it down quite a bit. This is, so he says don't use well water. Well, I don't know if you guys have well water, but I live in Los Angeles and we don't have well water. They did, like, different waters made a difference. So I'm not sure that we're really excited about river water because everything's so polluted these days. But if it's like long flowing water, that helps move things. Different waters had different characteristics. Well, that's the main part I wanted to talk about. I do have a few more slides if, you know, you have time, and if our time's up and we just want to do questions, that's fine too. I think that Adiel has either already sent out the slideshow to you as a PDF or will in the near future. So you have access to the slides. This is going to be a video. If there's anything you want to review, you can see it. So I have just a few more slides. Should I do them or should I stop?
We'll send the PDF maybe tomorrow. And if someone has questions, so now it's a good time. If not, I will ask. What about the second cooking? It's very famous now to cook it twice.
He doesn't talk about that. So does that mean they didn't do it? It probably does, unless, you know, the family was struggling for money. They probably didn't. There actually were some things that I jumped over. For example, if you're making a wine, like herbal wine to drink, when you strain it out, he says you can simmer the dregs and just drink that as a decoction too. There'll still be stuff in it. But he doesn't talk about second or third cooking, you know, so I don't have a clue. I haven't seen that in old books. I would imagine that was a save money technique.
And what about tincture that is very famous in the West? You have opinions about it?
Well, some things were made to be an herbal wine. By tincture, do you mean something that's really super potent and you only take a few drops, or do you mean any herbal wine?
It's like putting the herbs with alcohol and water for like a month, and they make it. This is the famous way in the West, in Israel also, to register a formula in herbs.
Yeah, it's definitely used for certain types of things because alcohol moves blood. And so if, you know, like you have, and it warms. So if you have a warming formula to move qi and blood, then that would be perfect. It's perfect for certain types of things. But I know some people make, you know, just kind of anything into an alcohol thing. And you know, some people sell these little bottles of tinctures and stuff like that. But to me, that would be, you know, he says you must respect the manufacturing process. And that to me is, you know, going to be okay for some things, but not for everything. I also have spent some time making liniments for external application. I really like doing that. He addresses making herbal wines a bit in there, but he doesn't really say here's for internal use, here's for external use. Mostly the process is the same though. The formula is different, but the process is the same. Are there also mentions of concentrating the honey with the decoction or herbs inside while simmering? No, I've not seen that, but you could make an herbal honey. People do that often with fresh herbs, actually, but then you have to be careful about the water content, because if honey has too much water in it, then it can start fermenting and so forth. But no, he doesn't mention that. Usually the processing of the honey is to make honey pills, and then you want the herbs to be ground up, and then you want very little honey and a lot of powder in it, so otherwise it'll be sticky. So I think for making honey pills, simmering them in the honey, although it's, you know, maybe you could consider simmering like one special herb in the honey so that honey has the characteristic of whichever herb you've picked out. That would be something to play with. Sure. What else? Oh, I'm still sharing.
Yeah, so
any other questions?
I think you can continue a little bit.
Okay. Let's see, I need to make this a slideshow again. Yes. So I do, while I remember, I do want to thank Adiel. This is fun. This is nice to have new friends. It's nice to be here with you. And so I appreciate all of you. And so time of administration. So Bansao Gangmu, which is a really famous herbal book also from the Ming Dynasty by Li Shuzhen, says, when disease is in the diaphragm and above, so like lungs or heart, eat first and then take the herbs. So the herbs are here, and then, I mean, the food is here, and then the herbs are stuck on top, so they'll stay higher up. I mean, this is part of how you get a formula to the appropriate place. Of course, patient compliance is another problem. If it's in the heart region, which really means the stomach region, heart region means stomach region in this context, and abdomen or below, take the herbs first, and then when you eat the food on top, that pushes it down below the diaphragm. When it's in the limbs and blood vessels, on an empty stomach in the morning, but in the bones and marrow on a full stomach in the evening. I guess when you want it to go outward, then you use a yang time, like the morning. And when you want it to go deep in the body, you use like yin food, full stomach, and evening time. So you could follow this or not follow this, but ancient doctors felt this contributes to the, formula strength. And poucher is the last thing that I have. And then again, in Bansao Gangmu, I mean, this may be stuff you learned when you were in school, but, you know, stir fried with rice wine to treat the upper and outer parts, but washed in rice wine, I guess, just splashed with rice wine and let it soak in a little bit, but not stir frying it for the throat to the umbilicus, to the waist. And for the lower body, don't use wine because wine rises. Cold herbs can be treated with wine so you don't injure the stomach. And dangui soaked with rice wine assists its function of scattering. And remember, of course, that the tail of dangui is more scattering, whereas the body of dangui is more supplementing. But as long as he's speaking of dangui, I recently found this abstract when I was searching. It's not a recent abstract, but I found it recently. Suotang, probably you know, is, you know, the 4 things decoction that treats all kinds of women's issues with dangui and chuancheng and shudi and baishao and so forth. But here's the question. You know, the original recipe tells you to use dangui that's been stir-fried with rice wine. Huangzhou is what they use, this yellow rice wine. And so they compared suotang using unprocessed dangui with suotang using processed dangui, you know, stir-fried with wine, and they found that it had better biological responses. You know, when they did the alcohol processing. And so this says to me, you know, that actually those ancient people really did know what works, that like the formula does work better when you've stir-fried the dangui with rice wine. So I just thought I'd throw this in. I do have the whole article. If Adiel reminds me later, I can send it to him, and he could also send that out if he wants to. So processed with rice wine moves things up, processed with ginger scatters things out, adding salt takes it to the kidneys and softens hardness. This may be stuff that you already knew, but I just thought I'd give you a source for it. Vinegar pulls it towards the liver and also stops pain, which is kind of surprising to me because vinegar is sour and sour should contract. But when you have, you know, pain is always lack of flow. So why does vinegar stop pain? I don't know. It goes to the sinews for sure, but why does it stop pain? I don't know. And of course, whenever you see vinegar, it means rice vinegar. Doesn't mean apple cider vinegar. It doesn't mean red wine vinegar. It means rice vinegar. And when it says wine, it doesn't mean grape wine. It means rice wine, because this is China we're talking about. Everybody's favorite, child's urine. No, thank you. It says it removes strong things. I don't know exactly what they mean by that. And moves things downward. That kind of makes sense, although I don't think I'm going to use it. If you've ever wondered about this tongbian, it's the urine of a young boy who's 10 years old or less, so no hormones. Hopefully they have a clean diet and no disease. It's considered salty and cold. It is supposed to nourish yin and descend fire and cool the blood and scatter blood stasis. It was used to treat a lot of bleeding disorders. It's supposed to be very, you know, it says cold. It's not just cooling, it's cold. And if you have a choice, it's the first urine of the day on the morning of the day before the full moon. Can you get enough to last you all month until the next full moon? Yeah, I am not using. This is not one I've experimented with, okay? But I'm curious. I always want to know, even if I'm not going to do. It continues on with rice soaking water was commonly used for Sangju and Baiju. So, you know, if you cook rice, you're supposed to rinse the rice before you cook it. But here you actually soak the rice for a half hour, and maybe you kind of rub it between your hands, and then you strain off this milky water and use that for like moistening the herbs and then stir frying them, and that's supposed to make like sangju a little less drying and more towards the stomach. Surprisingly, prepared with milk moistens dryness and engenders blood. Well, it's not surprising that it moistens and engenders blood, but just the fact that they used it at all. Processed with honey, that makes sense. I haven't tried this one either. Aged earth from a wall, or earth from an old wall, or something like that. Yeah, I haven't tried that. Supplements the middle jiao, and I don't quite understand, keeps qi from galloping away, but I think that might mean in desertion or collapse. When, you know, qi is deserting, it may help hold it in towards the center. And wheat bran is used in processing certain toxic herbs, because I think it absorbs some toxic oil. So that's what it means, restrains a cruel nature. And okay, let's see. Black bean decoction is used for things like hushowu. Some use a gansao decoction. So you just moisten the herbs, give it some time to soak in. You don't float them in the liquid. You just sprinkle the liquid on and let it soak in for a while, and then you stir fry it dry. And I have videos that include that kind of stuff. Yeah, but you know, I know you're not going to be using pork fat, but I'm not censoring. I'm just telling you what the book says. And so the citrus peels, you just want the peel. Like you could make chenpi on your own. You just want the peel, and most of the time you want to scrape off some of the white stuff. I've got some chenpi going. It's not you know, they have like very specific processing methods, but even you can just, you know, if it's organic fruit, you can just dry it and use it as chenpi. And it's much more fragrant than what I get from herb store. Then this lianzi, the lotus seed, you're supposed to take out the little core of it. Can you imagine sitting there picking out the little core of like 100 pieces of lotus seed? Anyway, okay, that's what I had to tell you guys. So again, I am not trying to say you have to do all this stuff, but I think it's something we should consider. And especially if you're making for yourself or your family, you may especially want to go the extra mile or kilometer or whatever. I'm American, so it's mile. Oh, we're so far behind. I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you for there are a few comments, and thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Lorraine, for sharing with us, with our pharmacy. And we hope everybody have a good time. And thank you very much.
Thank you for asking me, and thank you everyone for coming.